In September of the year 2000, a fledgling startup operating out of a small office in Los Gatos, California, was bleeding cash. The company was burning through its initial venture capital, which is the high-risk private equity financing provided to early-stage startups with perceived long-term growth potential. Facing a severe liquidity crisis, the founders sought a financial lifeline from the undisputed titan of the home entertainment industry. At that moment, Blockbuster was a retail behemoth, boasting thousands of stores globally, billions in revenue, and a seemingly impenetrable market position. The ensuing meeting would become one of the most consequential turning points in modern corporate history. Reed Hastings and his executive team traveled to Dallas, Texas, to propose a partnership to Blockbuster's chief executive officer, John Antioco. The pitch was straightforward but audacious. The startup would manage the retail giant's nascent online brand, and in exchange, the retailer would promote the mail-order service in its physical stores. The asking price for a 50% stake in the young enterprise was $50 million. The proposal was swiftly rejected, reportedly met with suppressed laughter from the incumbent executives who viewed the digital upstart as a niche novelty rather than a systemic threat. That rejection was not merely an oversight of a future competitor, but a symptom of a deeply entrenched business model dependency. Blockbuster's profitability was heavily reliant on a specific operational quirk, generating approximately $800 million annually from late fees alone. This revenue stream effectively penalized the company's most active customers, creating a pervasive friction point in the consumer experience. While the financial metrics indicated robust health, the underlying customer sentiment was steadily souring, masking a critical vulnerability in the retail giant's armor. Meanwhile, the Los Gatos enterprise was aggressively iterating on its own value proposition to eliminate exactly that friction. Netflix abandoned its initial pay-per-rental model, transitioning to a subscription-based DVD-by-mail service. For a flat monthly fee, subscribers could keep DVDs as long as they wanted without penalty, receiving a new title only after returning the previous one. This structural pivot fundamentally realigned the company's incentives with consumer desires, transforming a transactional relationship into a recurring membership and entirely eradicating the punitive late fee model. Executing this subscription model required overcoming immense logistical barriers. The physical distribution of optical discs through the United States Postal Service demanded an unprecedented level of operational efficiency. The company constructed a sophisticated network of regional sorting hubs designed to process millions of red envelopes daily with automated precision. This hidden infrastructure ensured that a vast majority of subscribers received their requested titles within one business day, effectively neutralizing the immediate gratification advantage historically held by brick-and-mortar rental stores. Beneath the physical logistics, a highly sophisticated data architecture was taking shape. The platform developed a proprietary recommendation algorithm known as Cinematch, which analyzed rental histories and user ratings to suggest obscure or independent films. This software did more than personalize the user experience. It actively managed physical inventory by steering demand away from newly released blockbusters, which were expensive to acquire in high volumes, toward the vast, cheaper catalog of older titles. This long-tail strategy maximized the utilization rate of their entire library. The quiet ascent of this mail-order system perfectly illustrates the mechanics of disruptive innovation. This economic theory describes a process where a smaller company with fewer resources successfully challenges established incumbent businesses by initially targeting overlooked segments before eventually moving upmarket. The physical disc service initially appealed to early adopters and cinephiles willing to wait a few days for a movie, a demographic the retail giant deemed insufficiently profitable to aggressively defend. By the time the incumbent recognized the threat, the upstart had already secured a formidable subscriber base. To fuel further expansion and fortify its logistical moat, the startup required access to public capital markets. In 2002, the company executed its initial public offering (IPO), a process where a privately held corporation offers shares of stock to the public for the first time. Raising over $82 million, this influx of capital provided the necessary leverage to aggressively scale customer acquisition efforts and expand the distribution network. The public filing also forced transparency, revealing the underlying unit economics of the subscription model to skeptical industry analysts. The public exposure of these metrics finally galvanized the Dallas-based retailer into action. In 2004, the incumbent launched Blockbuster Online, a direct competitor to the mail-order subscription service. Leveraging its massive marketing budget and brand recognition, the corporate giant aggressively subsidized the new division, initiating a brutal price war. The retail empire leveraged its physical footprint, eventually introducing a program called Total Access, which allowed online subscribers to exchange mail-order DVDs for immediate rentals at local stores. However, the Total Access initiative introduced massive internal friction. The retail giant operated on a franchise model, meaning many local stores were owned by independent operators rather than the corporate entity. These franchisees deeply resented the online program, which they viewed as cannibalizing their walk-in traffic and local revenue. Corporate leadership was forced to navigate a delicate political balancing act, attempting to modernize the business while simultaneously placating the very store owners who generated the bulk of the company's historical profits. Compounding these structural challenges was a severely compromised balance sheet. Following a corporate spin-off from its parent conglomerate, Viacom, the retail empire was saddled with nearly $1 billion in debt. This massive financial obligation severely restricted the company's agility, forcing leadership to prioritize short-term cash flow to service debt payments over long-term strategic investments. While the mail-order upstart was reinvesting every available dollar into growth and technology, the legacy retailer was constrained by the financial ghosts of its corporate past. Recognizing that physical media was ultimately a transitional technology, Reed Hastings began preparing for the next paradigm shift. In 2007, the company launched a feature called Watch Instantly, delivering a limited catalog of films directly to personal computers via the internet. This was a perilous strategic pivot, as it required cannibalizing their highly profitable physical distribution network to invest in a nascent, unproven delivery mechanism. The initial catalog was sparse, and early broadband infrastructure struggled to deliver high-quality video consistently. The transition to digital delivery introduced entirely new operational and legal complexities. Unlike physical discs, which were protected by the first sale doctrine, allowing the purchaser to rent them out freely, digital transmission required negotiating complex licensing agreements with notoriously protective Hollywood studios. The cost of these streaming rights was astronomical, and the technical challenge of building a global content delivery network required massive upfront capital expenditure. The leadership team was betting the entire future of the enterprise on a technology that was still in its infancy. During this critical period of digital transition, the incumbent retailer experienced a catastrophic failure of leadership continuity. John Antioco departed the company following a bitter proxy fight with activist investors who opposed the heavy spending on digital initiatives and the elimination of late fees. The incoming executive team immediately reversed course, reinstating punitive fees and drastically cutting the budget for the online division to artificially inflate short-term retail profitability. This fatal strategic reversal effectively ceded the digital future to their primary competitor. The consequences of this executive myopia were swift and devastating. As broadband penetration increased globally and consumer preferences decisively shifted toward on-demand digital consumption, the brick-and-mortar rental model collapsed. The physical stores, once the primary driver of revenue, transformed into massive liabilities burdened by expensive long-term commercial leases and high overhead costs. By 2010, the former retail titan filed for bankruptcy protection, marking the definitive end of an era in home entertainment. Deconstructing the survival of the digital platform reveals a masterclass in managing unit economics. The digital transition drastically altered the customer acquisition cost, CAC, which is the total sales and marketing expense required to earn a new client. In the physical realm, acquiring a customer required expensive direct mail campaigns and localized advertising. In the digital ecosystem, the friction of sign-up was reduced to a few clicks, allowing the platform to scale globally at an unprecedented velocity while simultaneously driving down the marginal cost of delivering content to zero. With the distribution mechanism secured, the platform faced a new existential threat from the very studios supplying its inventory. As media conglomerates realized the value of direct-to-consumer streaming, they began pulling their licensed content to launch proprietary services. In response, the platform executed another massive strategic pivot, transitioning from a mere aggregator of licensed media to a premier producer of original content. This shift required billions of dollars in debt financing, fundamentally transforming the enterprise into a global production studio. Producing original intellectual property necessitated a rapid and aggressive global expansion strategy. To amortize the massive production budgets of exclusive series and films, The platform needed a subscriber base far larger than the domestic market could provide. The company launched its service in over 130 countries simultaneously, a logistical and regulatory monumental task. This required adapting the platform to accommodate dozens of languages, local payment infrastructures, and varying levels of global broadband reliability. This global footprint generated an unprecedented volume of behavioral data, which the company weaponized to inform its creative decisions. Unlike traditional television networks that relied on rudimentary ratings and pilot testing, the digital platform possessed granular insights into exact completion rates, pause behaviors, and genre preferences across diverse demographics. This empirical approach to content commissioning mitigated the inherent financial risks of Hollywood production, allowing the company to greenlight expensive projects with a high degree of statistical confidence. Underpinning these continuous strategic evolutions is a highly specific and often controversial corporate culture. The leadership team deliberately engineered an environment prioritizing radical candor, high talent density, and the ruthless elimination of bureaucratic processes. This framework empowered lower-level executives to make massive financial decisions without seeking consensus, fostering an organizational agility that legacy media conglomerates simply could not replicate. The culture was designed specifically to prevent the kind of institutional inertia that had doomed their early retail rival. Today, the competitive landscape has entirely transformed. The platform no longer competes with physical retail stores, but with the largest technology and media conglomerates on the planet. Trillion-dollar tech giants and century-old film studios have launched their own digital platforms, initiating the modern media wars. Yet, the foundational advantages established during the early transition away from physical media, a massive global subscriber base, a proprietary recommendation engine, and a deep library of original intellectual property continue to provide a formidable defensive perimeter. Even as market saturation approached in core territories, the enterprise demonstrated its characteristic willingness to abandon deeply held orthodoxies. After years of staunchly refusing to include commercials, the company introduced an ad-supported subscription tier. This pivot acknowledged the macroeconomic reality of consumer price sensitivity and the finite limit of subscription revenue growth. By diversifying its monetization strategy, the platform opened a lucrative new revenue stream while simultaneously lowering the barrier to entry for cost-conscious consumers. The juxtaposition of these two corporate trajectories provides a stark lesson in strategic foresight. The retail giant failed not because it lacked resources, but because its leadership remained stubbornly anchored to a decaying paradigm. They optimized for the preservation of existing revenue streams, rather than the creation of new ones. Their internal metrics measured the health of a dying business model, blinding them to the rapid shifts in consumer behavior occurring just outside their physical storefronts. Conversely, the digital platform survived through a relentless willingness to cannibalize its own success. From transitioning away from the lucrative physical disc business to fundamentally changing its relationship with Hollywood studios, the enterprise consistently chose future relevance over present comfort. The downfall of the legacy retailer was not an inevitable casualty of technological progress, but a direct result of a failure to adapt to the changing mechanics of distribution and customer value. Ultimately, the history of Netflix streaming and the subsequent Blockbuster collapse is the definitive narrative of modern corporate disruption. It proves that dominance is never permanent, and that the most dangerous threat to an established empire often arrives not as a direct competitor, but as a structurally different alternative. The enduring lesson is that businesses must remain fiercely objective about their own utility, constantly evolving their value proposition before the market forces them into obsolescence.